Hey folks, you're on the Insecurity Project. I'm here again with my great friend Greg. Today we're talking about mythology and the importance of understanding the mythological world in dealing with your insecurity. So this is a subject that I'm learning about a lot lately. It's a new world to me. I mean, you hear me talk about Joseph Campbell's The Hero's Journey a fair bit. That's the closest I've come to an understanding of mythology. I'm trying to read Stephen Fry's book Mythos at the moment, but I'm lost. The great advantage of talking to you is that you're across this stuff in a way that I will take me a long time to be. So I think the advantage of being able to pick your brain on this subject is really useful. And I love the way that you talk about this stuff. Every time I hear you talk about mythology, it draws me into a more beautiful experience of life. And I feel energized and enthused about the journey of life. So tell us about this world of mythology and the importance of having a mythology to navigate life.
So I think my big introduction to mythology came through a lovely guy called Alexander Shire, anthropologist, philosopher, Jungian practitioner, theologian, great guy. And I met him, and at the point at which I met him, I was really in very what you would call a dualistic kind of tension. Things were right, they were wrong, they were black, they were white, things were in, they were out. The categories were dualistic, they were binary. One was here, one was here. And the honesty about duality was that you can really divide your world up. Those, like you're right, you're wrong. You're a good person, you're a bad person. That they're simple categories, but they also have a certain ring of truth to them.
Yep.
Right. And so I had approached my spirituality and my worldview coming out of a scientifically kind of orientated society where you reduce things down to a knowable truth fact. My world was like that. My spirituality was like that. There were good people, bad people. There were people who were of God, others who weren't of God. That was the whole schema. But that left me narrow. That I found myself in an ever narrowing kind of aperture. My life was like, it was a hard place to live. It was primarily a judgmental place to live. And then when I met Alexander, he sort of said, well, there's a truth to that, but literality is the first step on the ladder of truth, and it's probably the most unhelpful step as well.
Sure.
And I had no idea of what he really meant. And that kind of ended into a journey into understanding myth, where a myth isn't necessarily a literal truth, but it's what you might call hyper-truth. And we're kind of evoking the idea that humans are sense-making creatures. We have, thousands and thousands of years of oral tradition where the central truths that would hold a community or a tribe or a culture together were passed on orally, passed on around fires, around ritualistic dances, in sacred, rites of passage, all that sort of stuff. And in those oral traditions, things would be enacted that pointed to a larger truth. There would be the invoking of kind of a metaphor. This is not, this is this, only not literally.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So a really simple example of that would be to say, Ange and I, my wife and I, literal fact, we were married on the 24th of September 1988.
Yep.
That's cold, hard, literal fact. But it's also boring and uninteresting, and whilst it's true, it actually isn't. It doesn't generate much. If you were to evoke a metaphor and say, when Ange and I were married, it was strawberries and chocolate, or it was whatever your thing is, it was bacon and eggs, or it was two things. You're now evoking a metaphor where you're saying two things that really complement each other have come together, and those two things really go well together, and they should be together on the same plate. That's the metaphor, right? Now, that's a much more interesting construct than we were married on the 24th of September 1988. It's less true because I'm not a piece of bacon and she's not an egg, or I'm not chocolate and she's not a strawberry. So it's less literally true, but it holds greater truth about the nature of our relationship. So then if you take a myth and you say myth is now even a more escalated version of the metaphor, the myth is multiple metaphors or multiple bits of typology or multiple bits of kind of very convoluted narrative into a cohesive story. And in that you have everything from dragons to witches to warlocks to shaman to serpents to if you go back into archaic mythology, you have the sacred bull, or you have pigs, or you have all sorts of animals in the mix. The tree of life. You don't go out to look for the tree of life because it actually doesn't exist, but it's a metaphor of this grounding fountain of life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. And the advantage of having those mythological stories to buy into is it helps you navigate the challenges of life and draws you into a bigger experience of life.
Yeah, well,
it's a sense-making paradigm.
Yeah, 100%. So it's a sense-making paradigm that is laden with truth after truth after truth after truth after truth after truth after truth. Albeit we're not accessing those truths through the lens of literality. But we're saying this is true. So, like Hansel, the Brothers Grimm in their narratives, there's a lot of truth in that.
Yeah.
And so you can access that truth. Now, what that helps you do is that Joseph Campbell makes his point. The world is actually the reality. The literal truth of the world is actually quite horrific. It's the universe is actually a dangerous place. There's viruses, as we know, that can kill you, that are not sympathetic to human life. We are literally floating on a ball in a sea of darkness. If you're a spaceman and you've gone out and you've looked back on the Earth, you go, "Oh my gosh, this little blue pearl is just extraordinarily vulnerable."
Yeah.
So we have this fragile existence, which really can be quite terrifying, and the literality of that as a literal truth could just, it could actually cripple you into inaction.
Yeah, sure, because it'd be too terrifying to do anything. What's the point of doing anything?
Yeah, so I try and firm up my world by only allowing things that I'm absolutely certain about. And my world gets scarier and scarier and scarier and scarier, and narrower and narrower and narrower, and more judgmental and harsher and colder and drier and more exclusive. And so literality, far from liberating us, actually becomes this extremely claustrophobic experience. Whereas mythology says, yeah, there's a dragon out there and you need to go and slay it. Or, Harry Potter, there is the most powerful dark lord known to our generation, and he wants to kill you. He's already killed your parents and he's coming after you, and he will kill your mentor, and he has conspired a whole realm of dark lords and witches to dark wizards to bring you down. Welcome to the Harry Potter novels, and Harry has to go on the quest of engaging that world, and in that there's all these truths about courage and friendship with and it's the same in the Tolkien, it's the same in C.S. Lewis, it's the same in
Star Wars.
It's the same in Dostoevsky, with Crime and Punishment, and so myth becomes a great way of, in many ways, subverting literality and saying literality is gross, it's terrible, but the mythic frame invites you on what Campbell would say is it invites you on the hero's journey, which you talk about at length.
Well, I love this because I think in the modern world there's a bit of a trajectory away from spirituality and mythology into rational thinking into science,
Yeah.
into reducing things into literal parts. But that is actually quite terrifying, and it's a journey away from life and into insecurity, because there's so much to be afraid of. So the value of realizing the importance of spirituality and mythology within that is that it draws us back into the game again.
Yeah, it does. It has that capacity, and it is also wonderfully inclusive. So within the mythological story, there is things to be fearful of, but there's also mentors, and there's also like you think of Frodo and he runs into Aragorn. There's a champion who's going to champion you. He can't throw the ring into the fire for you, but he can kill a horde of orcs for you, and he's got your back. And there's Samwise Gamgee. There is a friend that will never leave you no matter what. And by the way, there's a Gollum who wants to exploit you and is waiting for that moment where he can steal back his precious. There's all of that within the mythological frame, and that is to say that in our life, that is all true. There is great friends, that will never leave you. There are utilitarian friends that will screw you over. There are elder people that will have your back and will give you wisdom beyond your years, and then there's people that will just, stab you in the back at a glance, and smile at you while they do it. So all the horror and all the splendor exists in the mythic frame, and it not necessarily in the literality. You know what I mean? The literal fact, you go, that's verifiable. I can build a plane on that. I don't want a mythic frame to build a plane. These wings do this. Are you sure? They flap really well. At 40,000 feet, I don't want a mythic frame. At 40,000 feet, I want stress testing. I want solid engineering. I want this plane architected to within a fraction of its tensile strength, So we can build planes and hospitals and modern medicine and a lot of stuff on scientific literality. What you can't build is you can't build a compelling life on that, because it doesn't have any nuance. It doesn't have any, it doesn't have the shape shifting that puts absolutely fantastic in the midst of truly terrible and tragic, and truly tragic and difficult in the midst of triumph and success. That whole shape-shifting nature of life, where all these things are as one, and the quest is to engage it. So that's probably
amazing. So to get up in the morning, like we find ourselves in a story, whether we're aware of it or not, and I think often those stories are unexamined and small and literal, but the aim is to keep telling better stories and bigger stories and more beautiful stories, and find ourselves in compelling stories. For people who've never even thought about mythology or this aspect of storytelling, where does someone begin?
Well, I think just by having an allowing mind, it's like a Buddhists call it a beginning mind, or to allow ourselves to go back to a really simple place where, like most of us were raised on Disney or raised on Pixar, or like stories. Grandparents read stories to us, or we read stories before we went to bed, or we watched videos or movies, or we went to movies. And you say going to a movie is a really important part of your practice, right?
Yeah, definitely.
That's my cat in the background, for those of you who. It's my 22-year-old cat complaining that it wants to come in. But yeah, so allowing stories to come back into our life in an enriching way is a really good place to start. And probably another thing that I think, when I started to engage a more mythological approach to life, is that it's a much less judgmental space.
Mm.
Do you know what I mean? Like you don't sit down to, the genre of mythology doesn't allow you to sit down and go, is Gandalf really a white wizard or a grey wizard? Like, what are you going on about? Just get with the spirit of it. He went through a transformational experience.
Mm.
You know, is Harry a true wizard or not? Or are there, does Diagon Alley actually exist? Is there, platform 9.5 or 9 3/4? Like, asking the literal questions, or demanding that level of scrutiny or certainty will just kill this space.
Yeah.
But so even the approach of someone you might think, I don't like this person. Maybe they're not an enemy, but they're someone in your life that's just horrific, right? Difficult.
Mm.
You could say, what is the story that I could tell myself about this that would. I'll give you an example, if you want me to.
Yeah, that would be great.
So there's a lovely mythic story about, I think it's an Irish folklore, and Joseph Campbell tells this story, but basically it's about a king that has 4 sons, and they ride off into the wood, and they get so involved in the hunt that they lose track of time, and night is starting to approach. They realise they won't get back to the castle in time. So they say, okay, we need to find some water and some sustenance and a place to sleep. So the oldest brother, and I can't remember what his name is, he says, you wait here, I will ride off and see what I can do. So he rides off, and he comes to this well, and there's this wizened hag at the well, and she's just gross, right? And he says, are you the well keeper? And she says, I am. And he goes, can I draw from your well? And she says, if you would grant me a kiss, you can drink from the well. And he says, I will, he's horrified. He goes, I will never kiss you. That will never happen. And he rides off without the water,
yeah,
and without the experience of having to kiss the hag, right? And so the story goes through, you can make this story a day long if you want, but the story goes through the brothers who one by one ride off. All of them find the well, all of them find the hag, and yet none of them, there's my cat, and yet none of them will kiss the hag, just a sec.
Hiccup.
This is Ezra, everyone, who's decided to join the podcast. And so finally the youngest son says, I'll ride off. So he rides off. His older brothers are there. He rides off, and he comes across the well, and he comes across the hag, and he says to her, are you the keeper of the well? And she says, I am the keeper of the well. And he says, can I please draw from the well for my brothers and I? We've been trapped in the woods, blah, 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 blah. And she says, you absolutely can draw from the well, but you first must grant me a kiss. And the younger brother goes, kiss thee? Not only will I kiss thee, but I'll embrace thee. And with that, he jumps off his horse, he rushes down, grabs the old woman, kisses her, gives her the biggest hug. And with that, as he's in the very act of doing that, she's transformed into the most beautiful maiden that he's ever seen, right? And so you listen to that story and you go, and you point. And there was a period of time where I listened to that story, and then I thought about my life, and there were some hags I needed to kiss. These were really difficult people that I was working with. These were situations that were unpleasant. I needed something. I couldn't get it unless I went through this situation. And this idea of kissing the hag was like, instead of saying, I will never kiss you, you have no part of me.
The literal, you are repulsive, I hate you, there's nothing we have in common.
Yeah, so
there's no way
if
you
I'm
violate my principles.
Yes, if I'm in the literal, they don't belong, right?
Yeah.
It's out. But if I get into the mythic, it sort of says, how about you don't take that oppositional judgmental approach? How about you jump off your high horse, get down, and go and plant a big kiss and embrace this situation for all it's worth.
Mm.
And in the midst of doing that, the promise is that the thing that you hate will actually turn into a princess.
Mm.
And more importantly, your worthiness to be the future king. So all the brothers went through the test, but it was only the youngest brother that proved his worthiness to be the future king, because he was the only one that would embrace the ugly situation and embrace and kiss the ugly situation to the point where it transformed itself into a beautiful outcome.
Yeah.
Right. Now you could like pick any crappy situation in your life and go, hey, are you willing to kiss the hag?
Yeah.
That's the power of mythology.
Mm. And having those narratives, having access to them, means you get to experience this hyper truth in the situation that you would never see.
Yeah.
And draws you into opportunity and growth and change and
it's transcended the literal space where it's all oppositional, and it's taken it into a place where it's actually appealing to the best part of you. Deeper truths in you, deeper realities about your capability to transform a situation. It's appealing to something inside of you at a really fundamental level. It resonates with us because it's narrative, and we're a sense-making narrative creature. So it goes, yes. Whereas the cold fact of you need to do this, and this in this situation, that wouldn't have the same effect.
Yeah, sure.
But the analogy, the story embellishes it. It ennobles the whole thing.
And this is the value of the hero's journey, the great work of Joseph Campbell, because it gives you this access point into a whole bunch of challenge, opportunity, difficulty, trouble, to help you make sense of the quest that you're on.
Yeah, I think that Campbell's contribution transcends even that, because what Campbell did is he travelled the world looking at everything from Australian Aboriginalism to New Guinean tribes to Irish folklore to Navajo Indians to Arctic. Like, he just literally, and he scanned it from, primitive mythology to Western mythology to Eastern mythology to creation mythology. He did such a massive body of work. And so when he comes up with this thesis around the hero's journey, he's basically saying what is central to humans is the need to tell stories that are patterned. His hero's journey was within the body of within any kind of mythological frame, there'll be this kind of structure, right? Now, what that does is it says you can be as tribal as you want, but I mean, and your tribes can disagree widely, Christianity can be here, Buddhism can be there, Hinduism can be there, monotheism here, atheism, like it can be all over the place, right? But what Campbell's contribution was to say, all of us are telling stories, and there is this underlying pattern in all our stories, and that belies our human connection. That speaks more to our human connection than our independent tribalism.
Wow. So not only does a mythology connect us with a higher form of ourself, it connects us with each other as
100%.
well.
It's generic to the human species. It's inherent in us to want to do that.
Now, I've seen Joseph Campbell's 3 weighty books on your shelf. 4, right. Yeah. And I'm grateful you're reading them. For the average punter, they're not highly accessible, or they're a difficult read.
No, everything that Campbell writes is difficult.
Yeah.
But there's lots of people you can read about.
Okay.
Lots of people have written about Campbell. Campbell's thesis about the basic structure, the hero's journey of a fundamental structure of mythology or mythological stories, was so influential, so groundbreaking. It's been contested. A lot of people say, I don't think that that's true.
Yeah, right.
But it was a seminal piece of work back in the 60s or 70s whenever it was written.
And that probably fits into his mythology as well. Of course, people have come and said, no, that you can't do that. That's not right. That probably is a mythology for that too.
Yeah, for sure. I don't think that he would have been perturbed by that at all.
So what books would you suggest for people to Who's done a good summary of Campbell, or who's?
Well, I think you could just go on Google and you could just Google, hero's journey, and
Just a simple
hero's journey will come up with the essential steps of what the hero's journey is, and then just go and rent any movie, any story, any of the ones, any C.S. Lewis, any Tolkien, any J.K. Rowling's, just go and get a movie and you'll find, the hero gets, there's the invitation, there's the crossing the threshold, there's the confronting, there's the divine support, there's the killing of the dragon, there's the, there's the lapse, or whatever.
Abyss and the cave.
There's the abyss, the cave. Yeah. They're all kind of there, And we don't access them by going, okay, where am I today?
Yeah.
But we kind of allow them to inform our journey.
Yeah, beautiful. I think that's super useful, and another access point for people into more generous, more beautiful spirituality, and generous and beautiful experience of being a human being. So thank you again for your wisdom and for giving some real value today.
All right.
So we'll leave it there. Again, if this subject is really interesting to you, search Greg at gregbellingham.com. Reach out to me, and happy to ask any future questions to Greg on the next episode that we record. So we'll leave it there. Ezra, the cat, says goodbye, and we'll talk to you again soon.